let's keep this picture. Who's they that are gathering them and throwing them? Who's the they that are gathering them and throwing them? All right? So we would need to look at, let's see, let me give you the right verse. Okay, Matthew 13, okay? So Matthew 13, when it talks about the wheat and the chaff, right? The darnel. So in Matthew 13, and I didn't have this in my notes, but I just figured it was important to go there. This is the understanding of what's going on in John 15. Matthew 13, it says, let's see, we'll begin in verse 24. We'll read the parable. Another parable he put before them, saying, the reign of the heavens has become like a man who sowed good seed in this field. Good seed, okay. We've got the gardener, we've got the vine, we've got the branches. Okay? Let me just write down where we're starting in Matthew 13, 24. Okay. So we have the same scenario in John. And he says, while the men slept, though, his enemy came and sowed darnel among the wheat and went away. And when the blade sprouted and bore fruit, then the darnel also appeared. So the blade sprouted and bore fruit. Which ones bore fruit? The wheat, the good seed, which was in the vine, bore fruit. But also those that were not bearing fruit grew alongside with the ones that were bearing fruit. And the servants of the master of the house came and said, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? From where then comes the darnel? And he said, a man, an enemy, did this. And the servant said to him, do you wish then that we go to gather them up? So we're having the finger pointed here at the enemy. So what is the enemy? Hasatan, the deceiver of the brethren, who has deceived the whole world, deceived them into what? Thinking that they were okay and in the right place when they weren't. Not just the overtly evil things that we always want to give Hasatan credit for. He's much more insidious and dangerous when he looks like an angel of light and his ministers look like ministers of light, leading you into a place of feeling you've arrived when you're only in worse trouble than you were before. Because now you think you've arrived and you're making less effort to figure out that you've really not arrived yet. Okay? And so that understanding, then they say, well, do you wish us then to gather them up? Very much like John 15. He says, they are like those branches that have dried up and thrown away, and they gather them up and they throw them into the fire. And he says, no, verse 29, lest you gather up the darnel, when you're gathering up the darnel, you also uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At the time of the harvest, I shall say to the reapers, okay, so now there are those whose job it is at the time of the harvest to go out and do this. They're called the reapers, who will first gather the darnel and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into the granary. Okay, so let's be careful with that now. He goes on to explain all this because they ask him, they're like, well, we didn't understand what you were talking about in verse 36. Explain to us the parable of the darnel of the field at the end of verse 36. And he answering said to them, he who is sowing the good seed is the son of Adam. The field is the world, and the good seed, these are the sons of the rain, those in covenant, but the darnel are the sons of the wicked one. And the enemy who sowed them is the devil. And the harvest is when? The end of the age. Because people might say, oh, the fields are white for the harvest. Now, they've said that, by the way, for the last 2,000 years, over and over again. But he's specifically saying, no, we're talking about the harvest being referred to here is the one at the end of the age, and the reapers are the messengers. So in case you think, oh, it just says the reapers, that could mean any anointed people or whatever. No, it's the messengers. There are angels assigned to do this. All right? He says, as the darnel then is gathered and burned in the fire, so it shall be at the end of the age. Now, let's understand the metaphor for those of you wanting Millennium and Kingdom Part 4. This is really the simplicity that you need to understand. those at the end like dried branches. If you had dried branches, totally dried out branches, and threw them in a fire, a blazing fire, what happens to them? They burn up very quickly. They're not burning forever, being tortured. They burn up very quickly. The hotter and bigger the fire, the much more quickly they burn. And so we're talking about here, the metaphor is that those that are not of the covenant, of the body, of the kingdom, of Yeshua, those ones are going to end up in Revelation 20, the lake of fire. And we know that that lake of fire is burning pretty hot. So we're talking like nuclear level. So branches hit it instantaneously, they are burned up. No suffering, no torture, none of that. Now, there are verses that talk about people's lamenting and weeping and all that, gnashing of teeth. Well, that's when they're waiting to get thrown in. They're not upset that they're getting thrown in as much as they're being upset that they thought that their way would get the result they wanted, and now they recognize finally that they earned this, that it really is true. And they didn't get away with just doing it their way all that time. Because remember, everybody gets their opportunity, so that means that everybody at some point does understand to make the choice between life and death. But we have to be careful that we are not, this goes now as we're shifting from loving Him, not that we're stopping that, but we're shifting our focus from the love of Him to the love of each other, that it would not be loving of each other for us to overstep our mandates and our trainings and our scope. You know, if you're in a profession, you know the scope of your profession, that you're never supposed to go outside your scope of your profession, because that would be getting you in trouble with your license. Well, guess what? You as a member of the body, as a covenanted part of Israel, it's outside of your scope to try to identify and remove the darnel from the body. That is outside of the scope. They are supposed to be allowed to grow together, which is aggravating, annoying, and frustrating. It just is, for both sides, because remember, the darnel doesn't think they're darnel, so they think the other side is aggravating them. It's not like you have anything that's overtly obvious which one's which. Otherwise, he wouldn't say, unless while you're trying to get the darnel out, you reap and you pull out the roots on the wheat also. So clearly it's not so simple. You think it is, but that's because you're seeing through the glass dimly and you don't realize that you're seeing through it dimly. And so we think we're so smart and we know who's who and what's what. I can't tell you over the years how many times people have asked me questions that were related to the idea of helping them identify who's in and who's out. Do these people get in? Do those people get in? What about this person? Those are all above everybody's pay grade except the Father. And He will give the Son authority to make those decisions at some point. But otherwise, it's above everybody else's pay grade. And I've answered it that way, by the way, for over 20 years. I've answered it consistently the same way every time. That is above and beyond our pay grade, okay? Stop trying to figure out who gets in. Walk out your own salvation in fear and trembling. Amen?